Perfect. John, have I set up properly that people can see? Amazing. Okay. Oh, kia ora everyone. Thank you so much for your time today. We are going to be talking to you about freedom camping first, which is something that we've brought to you before, and our gambling policy review is also the second topic that we're going to be talking about. Mindful of time, and we're in the afternoon and you've had a lot on already, so we're going to point out the most important parts. And really the purpose for this afternoon is we are seeking some direction on the policy approach that we take for both reviews. So that means we are listing out the information that we've gathered and some options, and seeking some direction on those options as well.
So I'd just like to say we're being supported here today by Laura Belby from Rice Spears, who's online. She'll be joining us soon. And also colleagues from the Community Strategies team, in case some queries come up about the intersection between freedom camping and homeless. And we've got colleagues from Regulatory Solutions as well, Stephen and Jamie. Okay, so I won't go into this too much detail, but just a reminder of the review and what's up for review. So the freedom camping bylaw, we're doing an early review because of the changes in the legislation, and as well as the need to discuss the temporary closure in the West Shore. So last time we came to Council in the form of a workshop, you gave us the direction to actually expand the scope. Let's review the whole thing. And so the policy problem that we are addressing in this review is still the same, is that we need to address those matters that are in the Freedom Camping Act under Section 11, that we have these powers to look at the protection of the site, the people who use it, and the access to the area. And when we're looking at protecting those, we're looking at issues like waste management, overcrowding, the use of the public spaces, but it's all very specific to the site and very specific to what the Freedom Camping Act allows us to look at. So that's just a bit of a recap. So what we're allowed to do is, in the Freedom Camping bylaw, we're allowed to define designated sites and set restrictions for those sites, and we are able to prohibit camping in certain areas. And just a reminder, the new national stance is that non-self-contained vehicles are not permitted unless we specify that in a bylaw. So we are able to specify that, but in the last workshop we were given the direction that we want to align with the national stance instead. And like I said, we are only able to add this bylaw looking at the three matters on the screen in accordance with Section 11 of the Freedom Camping Act. So we have a bylaw at the moment. It's generally pretty permissive. Across Napier, anyone can camp in a self-contained vehicle for one night as long as they comply with the conditions set out. So it's about being in a certain type of area. So yeah, generally pretty permissive, but if they would like to stay for more than one night, they must be in a specific site that is not in any of the prohibited sites, which is like our reserves, and they must abide by the requirements of the bylaw, which talk about use, waste, damage, fire, things like that. It also does discuss some scope for temporary closure and the enforcement and penalties that apply here. So this slide you have seen before in an earlier workshop just summarises the sites and prohibited areas that are specified in the bylaw as it stands. So from left to right is a quick refresh. We've got Allison Street car park, which we will refer to as the pump track. That's at the intersection of Allison Street and Marine Parade, which has about 45 parks, self-contained only for 3 nights maximum. The full site there is used for freedom camping. Second from the left is Te Karaka Perfume Point, where we have a mixed-use car park. 4 of those sites are designated for freedom camping for 2 nights maximum, self-contained only. In the middle there we have the West Shore Beach Reserve, which is currently temporarily closed. That closed in September 21. When it was open, it was allowed for 4 vehicles maximum and 2 nights maximum, but was not available between 24th of December and 7 February. Self-contained only. The one in blue is our current site, which is caters for non-self-contained vehicles at the Foreshore Reserve car park, so slightly south along further down off the end of Marine Parade off State Highway 51.
Currently 8 car parks earmarked for freedom camping in there, 2 nights maximum, and a maximum of 10 nights per calendar month allowed in that car park, non-consecutive 2 nights, obviously. And then lastly, we do have some specified prohibited areas identified in the bylaw. I won't read all those out, and there's a large number of reserved spaces that are prohibited as well that are listed in the bylaw. So we have, as I mentioned, got Laura Belby online via Zoom, who's joining us from Rice Spears. You may have seen in the media a couple of weeks ago the outcome of a judicial review where Queenstown Lakes District Council were taken to court by the New Zealand Motor Caravan Association about the development of their bylaw. So we thought it would be useful to have Laura talk to us about that and the considerations and implications that has for our bylaw review that we're looking at ourselves. So Laura, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone see and hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Yep.
Perfect. That's great. Okay. Thank you. Well, as the team have just said, as Napier is embarking on its review of its freedom camping bylaw, we have had a very important case law update come out of Queenstown on the topic of freedom camping. And that's just been released in the last 3 weeks. I think it was released mid-September from the High Court. So the timing of that decision for your own process is actually fantastic. It gives incredible guidance on what can and can't be included in a freedom camping bylaw. And I'll talk through the reasons why, but ultimately what the High Court found with QRDC's bylaw is that it contained errors, and those errors were significant, and the outcome for that bylaw was that it was declared invalid, and essentially the Queenstown Lakes will now have to go back and do the whole thing again, which is, as you'll all be aware, is a hugely time-intensive, cost-intensive process. So I think it's fantastic timing for you all that this decision has come out when it has, because it means that you can ensure that your own bylaw is right from the outset, and that the process doesn't either drag out longer than it needs to, or that it's challenged in due course. What I think it does show, this Queenstown process, is that freedom camping bylaws, as far as bylaws go, are particularly at risk of challenge. This is not the first time a freedom camping bylaw has been the subject of a judicial review. And actually for Queenstown, this was the second time in quick succession. So it did have a first go at a freedom camping bylaw in 2019. And that bylaw was subject to a judicial review application, which ended up with the council deciding to revoke the bylaw and start the process all over again. And then it introduced a second bylaw, the bylaw that is the subject of this court proceeding in 2021. And it backed that bylaw, went right through the process. The council adopted the bylaw. It was subject to judicial review, went right through the court process, and was ultimately declared invalid by the court. So they're back on their third time. So I think that just really reiterates and is really demonstrative of how important it is to get this right at the outset. So one of the key issues, there were various issues that formed part of this judicial review, and it's a fairly long decision. But what I'm going to try to do today is just distill it down to one of the key issues that's particularly relevant to this stage of the bylaw making process. And essentially what that issue was whether the council, in making its bylaw, had regard to some irrelevant considerations. And the two considerations that were the feature of this judicial review were the protection of what the court referred to as economic values. And essentially what it was meaning there was private property values, and whether that was a relevant or an irrelevant factor in its decision making. And then secondly, the protection of amenity values that were enjoyed by both private and commercial properties. I think to really understand why the court got to where it is, it's important to go back to the Freedom Camping Act. This is where it all starts. It's the Freedom Camping Act that actually empowers a council to make a freedom camping bylaw. And I think the key point to note about the Freedom Camping Act is that it's a very permissive piece of legislation. So it essentially, it does two important things. It says that you cannot make a bylaw that prohibits freedom camping in all local authority areas. And it says that freedom camping is permitted in any local authority area unless it is restricted or prohibited in accordance with a bylaw. So that's where your bylaw becomes incredibly important in this area, because the Act itself is a very, very permissive piece of legislation. So it does allow you to make a bylaw restricting or prohibiting freedom camping in certain areas, but only in certain situations, and that really is the crux of this judicial review. So what the Act says is that you can make a bylaw prohibiting or restricting freedom camping, but to do that you need to be satisfied of three things. You need to be satisfied, of one of three things. You need to be satisfied that the bylaw is either necessary to protect the area, to protect the health and safety of visitors to the area, or to protect access to the area. And those criteria are in the legislation, and it was those that were the focus of this Queenstown judicial review. So ultimately what happened in the Queenstown case was the council had on board a consultant, and that consultant came up with a set of site assessment criteria that the council officers then utilised when they were assessing whether or not the various local authority areas in the district were suitable for freedom camping. And two of the criteria that it included in that site assessment criteria were the protection of economic values, and I'm talking sort of the private property in the private property sense there, and the protection of private amenity values. There was a lot of discussion, it's a lengthy discussion by the court as to whether or not those were relevant or irrelevant considerations. And there were two distinctions between them. So the first was in respect of the economic values. What had happened with the economic values is that the sites had been assessed and scored, taking into account economic values. And the council then realised partway through the process, or accepted, that actually wasn't a relevant consideration. But the scoring that had factored in the economic values nonetheless was before the hearings panel when they deliberated on the bylaw itself. And the court couldn't be satisfied that this inclusion of economic values in the scoring system hadn't permeated the deliberations. And so even though the council, by the time it got to the deliberation, had accepted that economic values weren't a relevant factor, because of their inclusion early on and in the way that the scoring process had occurred, the court ultimately found that the bylaw was flawed in that way. What Queenstown didn't accept right throughout the process, and why this right through the JR was that it couldn't have factored in private amenity values. So essentially the impact of a freedom camping area on how, whether it was a residential or a commercial area, on how a freedom camping area impacted those private, the enjoyment of those private areas. The council didn't accept that. It was in the site assessment criteria, it was in the scoring, and I understand that the council in that case actually got legal advice through that process, and whilst that wasn't disclosed, it was clear through the judicial review that the advice to the council in that case was that amenity values are a relevant factor. And so they ultimately were factored into the council's or the hearings panel's deliberations, and resulted in only a bylaw which prohibited freedom camping in all but one local authority area. So a big impact and a huge restriction via that bylaw process on freedom camping. And the court disagreed with the council and found that, like economic values, private amenity values are an irrelevant consideration that the council, or the council in its site assessment process, and the hearings panel in deliberating on the bylaw should not have had regard to. And ultimately, the decision goes into this at length, but ultimately the reason for the court's decision and finding in that respect came down to the use of the word area in the Freedom Camping Act. It's around the protection of the area, the protection of the health and safety of persons visiting the area. And in using the word area, what it is meaning is the local authority area. It is not meaning the surrounding community. The court was very clear, there's no two ways about it, the court was very clear in that decision that it is the area that the council is required to focus on. And for that reason, because those two criteria had featured throughout the process, and in particular the amenity criteria, which the council even in its deliberations still accepted was or still believed was a relevant consideration, the court found that the bylaw was invalid, and essentially that council needs to now start all over again. So I think the key takeaways for you as a council, as you are at the sort of infancy of this review process, is that it's incredibly important that that site assessment criteria are correct from the outset, because that's that's going to shape the process from there. And if there are any, I think it's the site assessment criteria, but it's also through the process, because you are going to receive submissions on the bylaw, and it is very possible, if not likely, that you'll get submissions that do contain irrelevant considerations. And so I think it's incredibly important that you're aware of this decision at the outset of this process, so that if that does arise, if that situation does arise throughout the process, you're cognizant of it and can receive but appropriately disregard any considerations that you're not lawfully able to have regard to in making this bylaw. That's it in a nutshell. It's, as I said, it's a lengthy decision, and if anyone is interested, it is a helpful read. But if there are any questions specifically at this point in time, I'm more than happy to answer those now.
Thank you. I think that was a very comprehensive explanation. Did anyone have any questions specifically with regards to this decision and court case? think it's pretty apparent what the Deputy Mayor, Brosnan.
Kia ora, Laura. Annette here. I was just reading through the decision, and I'm just sort of turning my mind to obviously community concerns around areas close to their property. And whilst the decision kind of focuses on the amenity value and the economic value, are there any other values that you consider to be lawfully considered that might encompass that sort of experience of living close to a freedom camping area? Is there any lawful consideration of that in any other form?
Look, yes, I think there are ways that you can craft your site assessment criteria such that they focus on the area itself while still protecting the surrounding sites. It's all in the way, I think, that you craft the site assessment criteria. And I think, Michelle, you might be able to help out here, because I'm aware that your consultant has gone back and had another go at the site assessment criteria. And so essentially, as long as the focus is on the site, you can achieve it, I think. If you as long as you keep the impact on the site itself.
For example, visual impact of activities on the site?
Yes, I think that would be valid.
Thank you.
Just to jump in there, thanks, Laura. Yeah, we have gone through the assessment criteria in some level of detail to ensure they reflect the requirements of Section 11 of the Act. So we'll talk through those with you as we go.
Any further questions of Laura before we move on? Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Laura. And Laura's going to stay on online for us in case anything else comes up as we go. So we'll just go back to the main screen. Thanks, John. So today we're just covering off the information we have collected to perhaps, we hope, help inform a direction from you about the review of the bylaw. So we've just put on the screen there the things that we have considered as part of this process. So looking at some data, seeking feedback from stakeholder groups and also from residents near to the existing sites, including the temporarily closed site. Some matters we couldn't necessarily consider, which are listed there as well. And yeah, we can get into more detail on those when we look at the criteria. So the data that we have collected, we've been working alongside our regulatory solutions team to gather the occupancy and compliance data, looking at complaints information. We've held quite a few discussions with stakeholders. Many of those were involved in the earlier working group at the last bylaw review. And we've invited nearby residents to the sites to give us their early input as well. We've looked at bylaws from similar cities, so coastal towns similar to ours, which you asked us to do at the last workshop. And we've conducted a site assessment through Sage Planning, so they're here to talk through that as well. So firstly, some of the data. I'll hand over to Jeriel.
Yeah, so this also came back from something that you asked us to look at. These are some of the stats about the occupancy of the sites that are currently in place. I think we'll go into detail about each one, but I think this is largely reflective of what we know. We're sure the second, third and fourth are smaller sites, less capacity, so less visits. We see a dip from COVID and then it's starting to pick back up. We're sure was closed, very low occupancy there, and obviously Pump Track, very popular site. And just to note, the removal of homelessness as a activity that we can address using the Freedom Camping Act we've already talked about, but these numbers do include homeless activity, so a person who would be residing in a vehicle within one of our sites. Also, just to note that in Pump Track, this is higher than in the other. The foreshore has a higher percentage of sites, of occupants that were homeless versus the other sites. So that's sitting at about 24% versus the other 3 sites, which range between 6 and 14%. So that's just important for your context. But if we look into them deeper, so that dotted line at the top displays the capacity of the site, the average capacity of the site, and each individual line is the separate year of occupancy stats, and across the bottom it's going through the year. So the key for us to look at is those peaks and troughs are just as we expected, high over the summer, lower. During COVID we see a big dip, and generally average across this medium to high occupancy rate. I think this shows that the site is well used, but obviously there are times when freedom camping is less popular as an activity. So I think that's what we're seeing here. My screen has frozen. Sorry. Okay, here we go. So the next one is Perfume Point, Te Karaka. Similarly, generally like a moderate occupancy across. That's the trend that we're seeing here. No significant peaks or troughs apart from those seasonal ones. So it shows us that the site is well used. Foreshore is the one where I noted that there is a higher percentage of homeless activity in this area, and that's what we can see in this 23-24 peak. There's a higher percentage of homeless occupants using the area. Otherwise, it's generally at capacity. So the demand and the supply are generally appropriate for what is happening in those areas. And our final site is the West Shore. Again, the peaks and troughs reflect what we know. That big dip in January is when the bylaw was originally instated. There was a restriction on summer use between December and January. So it was restricted. People couldn't stay there during that time. That's why we see that. And then those bottom 3 lines indicate that the site has been temporarily closed since 2021. Infringement data, this again you have seen. We see peaks in 2019 across all the 4 sites, but in general, the foreshore is a little bit higher those first 2 years. I think this is also reflective of the capacity of each site as well.
Sorry, Drew, can you just elaborate on that, like infringements for staying too long? Or?
That's right. Any breach of the bylaw would be considered infringement, so staying too long, staying in the wrong kind of vehicle, parking in the wrong spot if they were in the foreshore site, or any of the conditions like noise, littering, things like that. Yes.
Gerald, just a question about foreshore. How often is that patrolled during the week?
So each patrol is the same. It's part of a patrol cycle. Okay. So each time a patrol is done, all the 4 sites are monitored, as well as any call-outs that might have been requested by a resident. Similarly, this is data you've seen already, that the patrol cost is the significant cost and the complaint cost goes down, and notably from the time that West Shore was closed as well, 2021. And again, we are aware that it's tricky because the effects of homeless activity within the freedom camping sites are very similar, but the new legislation is very clear that the activity can't be addressed using the Freedom Camping Act. So I think that's just important to recognise that homeless activity is actually increasing, but it's outside of the scope of this review, so it's going to take some careful crafting to see how we manage the effects on the sites. Unfortunately, we aren't able to address homelessness as an activity through this review. Yes.
I have a question just on the last slide. In terms of level of service, if we were to drop that level of patrol, do we think that there'll be a significant negative impact of that? Do we feel like we've got the level of control of it right? Excuse me.
Yeah, Rachel, do you have any comments on that? If we were to drop the level of service in terms of the patrolling of the sites, would that have an impact on the infringements complaint?
It would be hard to say. It would be interesting to know how much compliance we're getting because of the patrolling and how much is people just doing the right thing because they are freedom campers who are abiding by the Motor Caravan Association guidelines and things like that. Jamie might have a view, but I think it would be really hard to say, and it would be sort of something that if you did want to go in that direction, then we would have to monitor it and see how that goes.
So it's something we could trial.
And this is another graph that you've seen partially already. This is the homelessness in the freedom camping sites just by themselves. So we only started collecting this data in January 2021, so just for your reference. And it might seem very high, but it's because the numbers represent the total occurrences. So, for example, one individual might be continually occupying a site, so that each time they occupy the site, that's how the data is collected rather than a reflection of how many homeless people are occupying the area. Awesome.
Great. So we'll just cover now the feedback and key kind of themes that we've heard from stakeholders and residents. So up there on the screen is the list of stakeholders that we've talked to during August. As I said, many of these had previously been on a freedom camping review working group when the bylaw was last reviewed. Plus, we've talked with some internal stakeholders, regulatory team, asset managers, Napier Assist and economic development. The themes here are up on the screen. So all of the stakeholders generally support freedom camping, but emphasise the need for structured management to protect local resources and ensuring responsible camping behaviour, while also ensuring the safety of campers. So in terms of safety and security, there were comments on the benefits of having a critical mass of campers at some of these sites, which made other campers feel safer, and also having the opportunity to have daytime visits to sites, if you like, people using them as car parks because they're coastal, actually helps with their feeling of safety. There was feedback from one tourist stakeholder locally about safety concerns that they'd heard of for single travellers at the foreshore site. So in relation to the sites themselves and their use, the Motor Caravan Association stated that their members appreciate the sites that we do have available. There was some split views across stakeholders about the use of waterfront sites for freedom camping, but also recognising that we are a coastal city, and that is part of the feeling and offering that Napier has. Everyone recognised the need to have relevant facilities at the sites rather than just kind of plonking a site somewhere with nothing. And DOC, the Department of Conservation, provided some information on the environmental impacts of freedom camping and the need to avoid a couple of sites at the foreshore southern end, which are public conservation land, so they're unable to be used for freedom camping. So they are home to some protected species. In terms of camper education, there was a few comments about that stakeholders are working quite hard with camper hirers, so in particular the camper van companies, about educating people to be responsible campers. And in terms of enforcement and compliance, several stakeholders talked about the impact of the change in certification requirements that are coming up there's been some delays in the transition period. So there was a request to have kind of a grace period for some campers while they all get certified as self-contained and certified by a plumber. So it's quite a bit of work to do to make sure the fleet is properly certified. But there was a view that having that certification will help with compliance. There'll definitely be less opportunity to have counterfeit self-contained certification stickers. There was quite a bit of comment from several operators about the kind of demand and demographics of freedom campers now post-COVID, that the numbers of visitors from overseas have not returned yet to pre-COVID levels, and there's definitely appears to have been a shift in traveller demographics. So some stats from the camper van companies, for example, about 90% plus of their vans are now self-contained, so very few offerings of non-self-contained vans. 98% of their clients are from overseas, but they're seeing people from different source countries than pre-COVID, so a lot more people from North America and a lot more from Scandinavia, with an average age of 31, so possibly a little bit older too.
Questions?
Yeah, sure.
Going back to the stakeholders, do RSE workers feature at all in those statistics?
The Backpacker Association did talk about RSE workers and how a lot of the backpackers have now taken on RSE workers because the backpacker demand has dropped off quite a bit post-COVID. So a lot of them are housing RSE workers instead. Yeah.
Thank you.
The Motor Caravan Association noted that Napier is a very popular destination for its members and that its own site that you're probably aware of in Ericsson Road, where they charge $5 per adult to stay, is very in high demand, and it's one of the top 10 most used sites in New Zealand. Holds about 200 vehicles, so it's pretty big. And economic benefit came up just in the fact that there's limited new data around the economic benefit of freedom camping. You probably have recalled the data that was last collected by MB, I think it was a few years ago. So there's no new information in that regard. And interestingly, no comments from stakeholders about a lack of sites or parks in Napier. So internal stakeholders, just briefly to cover this, overall comments that there's been a decrease overall in levels of infringements. However, complaints about activity at the foreshore site, which mainly appear to focus on homeless activity. Some of the Napier Assist team are now warranted to trespass, and they're modelling their response to homeless activity on what's being used in other cities with a similar service, such as Hamilton. And Napier Assisted note also that 2 of our current sites are covered by CCTV with the new CCTV cameras with automated number plate recognition, and so that's the Pump Track and the Perfume Point sites.
Michelle, can I just ask a question?
Sure.
That one about infringement. So what's the process if it's someone actually freedom camping who gets an infringement, or someone who's homeless? What's the difference in the way they're infringed, or what happens? Are they treated differently?
Yeah. Jamie, do you want to comment?
Where am I?
I can probably answer that.
Oh, okay. Got the microphone.
But you should come up here, Jamie,
Yeah.
sit beside me, because I think that would be a good thing. Or sit beside Michelle and Juriel, actually. That'd be great. So the Freedom Camping Amendment Act, or there's another name for it, I can't remember exactly, basically carved out any ability to infringe people who were experiencing homelessness. So we do not infringe people who are experiencing homelessness. Sometimes it can be quite challenging to determine whether a person is actually homeless or they are a freedom camper. But if there is an infringement provided by mistake, then and we're notified of it, we will waive the infringement.
Hayley?
With the CCTV coverage, is that well signposted that there is cameras in that area?
Yeah, as per our CCTV policy, yes, definitely signposted, and there's a policy online for people to refer to. Yeah.
I have a question also. Is it a liquor ban and smoke-free, vape-free area? So I thought the foreshore was supposed to be smoke-free and liquor ban area.
The
If it's a
foreshore is
reserve
not.
area, it will be covered under the Reserve Management
Yeah.
Act. But I don't know about vape. There isn't anything. There's no legislation that sort of prohibits that from public places. But yeah,
It is a liquor ban area.
it is a liquor.
So people can sit in their cars or vans and drink, but not outside. Is that how it works?
I can look it up on our.
Yeah.
That's not intended.
Juliet. Sorry, just another question, just further to my previous question. So does that mean that if someone's homeless in, say, the Foreshore Reserve, there's absolutely no powers by the council to actually do anything? So it can become a permanent homeless place to live? Is that because I've seen people live there for weeks and weeks on end? I go there almost every day.
I can take that one as well. So it's there is no legislation for us to infringe them under freedom camping legislation.
Yeah.
However, it is a reserve and we can trespass people from reserves, and we do so, but we really try and take a different approach to that to start with. We really try and connect them with social services. We really try and get them to move on of their own going. We try and get them into housing, and Napier Assist do a lot of work in that regard. If we really have to, then we will. But it is a last resort.
Great. So in terms of nearby residents, as I said, we offered residents around the current sites an opportunity to provide early input. So we identified households within 100 metres either side of the midpoint of the existing sites, including West Shore. So in the end, the residents of Perfume Point were not included in this letterbox drop because they're quite a distance, about 300 metres plus from the midpoint of that site. So the letterbox drop went to 17 homes in West Shore, 17 in Te Awa Ave, and 3 or 4 in Marine Parade that are opposite the pump track. And they were given 15 days or so to give us their feedback. So in terms of responses from residents, we heard from 8 in West Shore, including plus the the West Shore Residents and Development Association. 6 of those wanted to see permanent closure of the site, and 3 would like to have it reopened. And we heard from 2 residents in Te Awa Avenue about the Foreshore site and wanting to see that close. So again, I'll just go through a bit of a summary of the items that were raised. So here we've grouped them in terms of the 3 sections of the Freedom Camping Act of relevance and consideration for the bylaw review. And then the bottom bit in that table is matters outside of the Act. So as you can see here, we had 6 residents, as I said, reply from the 17 households in West Shore wishing to see the site closed permanently. So that's what these themes are from those people. Mm-hmm. So the top one there, people wanting to have the area protected from environmental damage, including instances and experiences of dogs roaming free from camper vans, public toileting issues, and possible impact on wildlife, including dotterels in the area. Issues around public defecation and urination came up, and a question around the overuse of facilities in the area, the toilet facilities. The second item there is around health and safety, just comments around intimidating behaviours, including towards other campers that were noted by residents, arguments over saving car parks and getting in there as soon as you can, and use of alcohol and impacts on people telling us that they felt unsafe in their own homes and when they had family visiting. Public Indecency Acts, people in states of undress, and unhygienic practices, again linked to defecation, overuse of the facilities, and rubbish being left behind in the site. The third one there around access to the area, comments around crowding in the park. It is a small number of parks, 4, and the rest of that parking area is prohibited for freedom camping. And comments around lack of car parks for local and other visitors to use. And yeah, I'll move on to the next one now. So this is the 3 residents, that wanted to see the site reopened, as long as it was for self-contained vehicles and that there just remained the 4 parks for freedom camping. Some other matters were raised outside of the Act, which are that it's not to be used by homeless and monitor use. Hi, Keith.
Hi, I just, is it right to ask a question about West?
Yeah, sure.
So the people that you went to, the 17 people, maybe that was a bit narrow, because I've had the McDonald's, Kathy McDonald, who's probably one of the most active people against it, who's not right in front of it but is affected by it, hasn't been spoken to. Of course, she saw the letter dropped in the next door letterbox.
Yeah, so.
And has rang me. And I mean, I think it's more than just straight across people.
Yeah, it's hard to draw a line as to where you go. And we did hear from.
When you've drawn though.
Yeah, we did hear from Kathy in the end.
Oh,
she did send us her comments. So she's one of the responses in this summary.
Cool.
Thank you for that.
And I think the important thing to remember is that everyone gets to have a say through the consultation.
Yeah.
So that will be open to everyone. But it was really challenging. Their team came to me and said, where do we stop? 100, 105 metres, 125, 150 metres? And it is pre-engagement, noting that everyone gets a say in consultation.
They don't understand that. The neighbour gets a letter asking about it. They don't think, oh no, I'll just wait for consultation, because they've got no idea. That's where the problem comes.
But when it comes out for consultation, they'll be able to see that they have no right.
Yeah, but they've rung us 1,000 times before it.
Hayley. I know the requests for the reasonings in there, they're all more limitations rather than reasons why they want to open. Did they say
Yeah,
why?
sure. I was just about to get to that. These people are either freedom campers themselves or they have children who freedom camp and they want to see freedom camping available and sites available.
Yeah, okay.
So the foreshore site, the 2 people responding here, again, we've presented these themes in the same way. So in terms of protection of the area, there was comments around vandalism, so broken bollards, burnt items at the site, missing signage and broken gates. Environmental impacts around noise from campers that these residents could hear from across the reserve, the railway line, the road, etc. And vehicles making noise at 3 a.m. on the reserve. In terms of health and safety, comments around antisocial and disruptive behaviours, also linked to the vandalism activities, and sort of some kind of anecdotal evidence about the presence of visiting gang members at the site, concerns about the low level of safety at the site, and including some perceptions around the security patrols not being safe at the site. And one household indicated feeling unsafe in their home due to the issues at the site.
Michelle, can I just add to that?
Yeah,
I go down there quite often every week and I don't feel safe. So I sometimes run past and there'll be dogs running out, there's fires on the reserve, there's litter, there's people sleeping in cars. It does not feel safe down there.
Yeah, thank you. When we get to the site assessment, we'll look through some of those issues too. Access to the area, comments about people feeling unsafe visiting the site, and because of that it's kind of limiting the opportunity for other users to visit it, and acknowledging, however, that some of the activities appear to be related to homeless people rather than freedom campers, so unclear as to where that sits. So the other thing we did, as I mentioned earlier, is look at bylaws from similar-sized coastal towns. So here we looked at Gisborne, Tauranga, Nelson, Thames, Coromandel and Whakatane who have bylaws. I guess the kind of take-home message from this is the bylaws are very much appropriate for each local area. You know, there's no one-size-fits-all with this. They have a variable approach to, you know, seasonal restrictions or the number of parks that they allow. One commonality, obviously, is general rules about the use of the sites. So we have got that in there for you to have a look at as well. Just conscious of time here. So we'll get to the site assessments. I'm going to invite Deborah and Rowena up to talk to this. We're going to pass around some information that they'll be referring to as well. And we'll pass over to them.
Hi, Debs. Good. Hello. How are we? Good. How are you? Nice to see you. You too.
So Rowena and I have been tasked with doing the site assessment work, developing the criteria, and ultimately ending up with a ranking of sites across the district, which unsurprisingly has had some challenges. A lot of subjectivity and the fineness of the process means that it you need some massive change to change the ranking. So subsequent to the Queenstown Lakes decision, we went to Rice Spear and asked them to have a look at our criteria, which was really helpful to make sure that we didn't get tangled up in the economic and amenity issues which were raised through that decision. But ultimately, it didn't change our rankings that much. So just a little bit of tweaking around the edges. So just bear that in mind when we talk through this, that it takes a big change in any one of the criteria across the attributes within that to change rankings. So for those of you who don't know my wonderful colleague Rowena, this is she, the brains behind the machine, across the detail. So people like me are heavily reliant on people like Rowena. So we've got some, so what we've done is develop criteria based on the intention of the Act. The 5 key areas that we went through didn't change as a result of the Queenstown Lakes judicial review. So those 5 key areas, which were safety, services, proximity to other activities, the site and the overall amenity, have stayed the same. What we did tweak was the attributes under those, okay, to make sure that that they weren't flipped, so we were focused on activities outside of the site, that we were focused on the suitability of the site for freedom camping. Right, so we went, you've got a couple of wise heads on this, in Jeriel and Michelle, and when we were looking at which sites we would look at, we're quite a big city with a number of car parks and a multitude of opportunities for freedom camping, but it wasn't, we collectively agreed that it was not the best idea to assess every site in the city, given that you've got the one-night rule across the city. You've got your parks and reserves constraints anyway. You've got a number of leased and public car parks which are constrained by virtue of the fact that they are public car parks and dealt with under the parking bylaw. So where we landed was that people come to Napier, and there is an assumption made here, and that they would like to freedom camp on the most beautiful part of our lovely city along the foreshore. So we really dug into the foreshore sites from Awatoto through to Lacane Road. You've had a lot of information. I'm like, oh my God, you'll be going, oh. So as part of that process, some sites were knocked out, and Michelle, I think, has alluded to those because of the dock concerns around fauna and flora, and the ecological values of those sites. So we kind of knocked those out really early. We also knocked out some sites really early that are particularly tight sites, small, constrained base gate and the Harris Playground sites. There's some car parks there that we said, oh, let's not dig too deeply into those ones because they're already particularly constrained in terms of how they function and who uses them. So those were knocked out. So we ended up with 18 sites. So within each of those 5 criteria, we had a series of attributes. The safety one, for example, has got 7, but overall amenity has only got 2. But we averaged the scoring across the site, across the criteria. So there was a total possible score of 15. So each criteria, so the 5 up there, had a maximum score of 3.
So 3 is good and 0 is bad.
Yeah.
And you only averaged when across the attributes that were able to be scored.
Yeah, so for the sites that didn't exist already, we couldn't score them on infringements, for example, because they didn't exist. So we just changed how we scored them. Yeah. Okay, so it's a complicated piece of work. Anyway, we landed it, which is great. So there's the map of the sites assessed. I don't think they'll come as any surprise to you which sites we've looked at. The total of 18 sites, including the 4 existing, 1 temporarily closed. Right. Foreshore Reserve car park. So this is the one that has been the subject. So we won't go through all of them because we've got some highly ranked ones and some middle bunch and then some low ranked ones. But we will talk about the existing ones and then another one which scored reasonably high. So the Foreshore Reserve car park, unsurprisingly for all the reasons that have already been stated, it's not a particularly safe car park. So on the issue of safety, we kind of said if you had a score of less than half, so 1.5 or less than 1.5, then we kind of said you were knocked out. And that doesn't mean that some of those safety concerns couldn't be remediated, but we did the assessment on the basis that there was no funding available to remediate sites where there were safety concerns. And the safety one is front and centre of the Freedom Camping Act and front and centre of Freedom Campers and just kind of front and centre. So that's how we've did that. So we'll get through to the end of this. So essentially this one got knocked out on safety, but we wanted to talk about it anyway because it's a really, and I've got a weird about this Freedom Camping. I'm out there looking at it, admiring it, not admiring it, and doing all those things. So this site, despite being in such close proximity to the pump track, has just got a whole lot of things that make it unsafe. It's just that little bit more distant, it's that little bit more separated from public surveillance, it's got a lower level of overall amenity, it's a bit shabby, all those things which mean it just doesn't kind of work on the safety fronts. It has got pretty good access from State Highway 51, although now we have to go down to the roundabout to come back round, so you've got a kind of circular thing going on there.
Do you think that's because there's a lot of homeless people are there?
It's that which comes first kind of thing. Is it because it's got a low level of amenity and a low passive surveillance and those kind of things that means that it attracts some homeless folk, or did the homeless folk come and you know, it's really hard to say, Maxine, but if you looked at that compared to the pump track, which is heaving and it's bright and it's really well looked after and there's lots going on there and there's great neighbouring activities, you'd just say this one's just not a sweeter site.
It's got, you know, it's dark, there's no light, there's limited lighting, and as Deb said, limited passive surveillance as well. Just in terms of the safety ratings, they were based on the CPTED attributes, so the crime prevention through environmental design is an international standard, yeah.
Debs, can you help me understand, what we've got in front of us? The Foreshore Reserve South, that's not this.
That's not that, that's the next one down.
Right. So we've gone straight to on this, which is site number 2.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Because we're not going to give you a rundown on all of them, and we've got full assessment sheets for all sites. So no, this is the next one up, Foreshore Site 2.
Thank you.
Okay?
Yep.
Right, so Pump Track, which is appropriately named because it's literally pumping down there. It's really well located, it's really well laid out, it's busy, it's got activities happening next door, it's well looked after, it's just a really good site. It's well serviced, it's got the dump station, it's got the loos, and all those things that go with it. It's got that same left in, left out onto State Highway 50, which is a bit of a pain, but I kind of talked to Rowena about it this morning. So it's not going to be an issue because you're in a camper van, you're used to driving. Get in, go out, come around, no biggie. It's good proximity to recreation activities and a relatively low level of infringement. It's a great site. I went down there last night and it was pretty busy, but it's a great site.
Wall, isn't it? Wall to wall.
Yeah, and there were 2 parks empty in that front row, but people had taken them up with picnic tables and chairs and stuff. It's a great site. So that ranked number 1, which is great given it's an existing site. So then Tikaraka Perfume Point, again, this ranked number 3 overall. It's got good sight lines, it feels safe, it's got a high level of amenity, it's well serviced, the access is pretty straightforward. The parks are easy in, easy out. So overall, that's also a pretty good site. Right, the existing temporarily closed site at West Shore rated 11 out of the 18 sites. So there's a big bunch in that middle overall, so slightly lower than half, we'd say. Reasonably good safety score, it's reasonably open, it's got good surveillance, it's got a clear layout. There's kind of that limited other activity in the area, which means it's slightly more isolated, but it's a pretty good open site. There's limited services, so the closest loos are those ones with the little mural on them, and it's got no water, which is a pain, I think. Good access to the beach, good proximity to the reserve, cycleway, all those bits and bobs. Relatively high level of infringements when it's open, which probably doesn't come as a huge surprise.
Are the toilets open 24/7 in these sites?
Oh, yes, I'm pretty sure they are actually. Yeah, pretty sure they are.
The toilets there are under negotiation to be moved.
Thank you, Councillor Price. I understand there's been a bit of chatter about that.
I said negotiation.
Yeah. Right. Yep. So the aquarium car park, based on the assessment we did, came in at number 2. It's a very safe site, it's very visible, it's next to a whole lot of activities, it's got CCTV, it's well serviced, it's got great access in and out. Unsurprisingly, I suppose, but until I'd done this, it had not ever been on my radar as a potential freedom camping site. So that was number 2. So I don't know if anybody's got any questions on that one.
Toilet's a long way away.
Yeah, so the biggest hitch, is the toilets by the playground. But remember, we're self-contained.
Self-contained.
Well, so toilets are a consideration, but these are self-contained for self-contained consideration.
The ability for our community to still go and source drawing free water from the station there?
I imagine so, it'd be good. Wouldn't it? Pretty easy. Heap of car parks in there.
Yeah.
Free barbecue.
Wouldn't upset our penguins?
Well, maybe. maybe it could.
We consult with them?
Yeah, a little chatter to them. So that came up of all the ones we looked at as number 2, which is interesting. Well, I think it's interesting. It's not that interesting. It's pretty interesting. Yeah, so on that matrix that you have got, so this sheet, the ones that we've got in red have been knocked out because they're less than 1.5 on their safety score. And then we've flagged a whole lot in amber down the bottom where the site has another activity that means it's really busy, or, for example, the Coot Road car park. So if you look at that, and we call it Coot Road number 2, so the far car park where you can basically drive in and drive out is potentially a pretty good site for freedom camping, but it's got the Sunday market in there, which means you'd have to think about how you manage that in much the same way as the Reef Garden car park, which is the one near the council building, so that's a paid parking during the day. And some councils have said, yep, it's all good, you can camp there overnight, but if you're there during paid parking hours, you will be charged paid parking. So there are some alternatives there. So we've just kind of flagged those, not to knock them out, but for awareness, really.
Sorry, where is the Reef Garden?
Oh, the Reef Garden, you know where Cape View is?
Oh, yeah.
And sort of in front of Kiwi Keiths, or the old Kiwi Keiths.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so most of those ranked sort of in the middle, so they are 5, 6, 8, 9, 4. So they rank quite highly, but you would have to manage that dual use.
Mm-hmm.
So we've aimed to just present you with the ones that we considered were enough to be viable options. So were there any other questions while the consultants are here?
Thank you, Mayor Wise. It may not be a question for you, but have we made a determination on an appropriate number of sites?
Yeah. Do you want to comment?
Oh, I've always got something to say, so yes, of course I'll comment. No, we haven't, and the challenge we have is understanding that demand. So obviously when I was driving around town last night, I thought I'd just zip out to Perfume Point and see what's happening out there. So 3 out of the 4 at Perfume Point, but I would say probably 30 out of the 45 at Pump Track. So I don't know.
Yeah, demand is an issue that we've looked into, and it's tricky because we only have the existing sites, and it would require us to go out and monitor new sites over a certain amount of time. So we've used the occupancy data of our current sites as indicative to say, yes, high enough for us to continue this existing level of service, but there is some space because of the pump tracks. Yeah, the pump tracks capacity.
Did you say earlier, though, that when you sought feedback from stakeholders, there hadn't been any comments about there not being enough sites?
Correct, yeah, no anecdotal feedback.
No, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And
So when you talk about the aquarium, the 45, was it? That's more than we've got in the whole city.
No, like 4 or 5 parts.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't necessarily have to have, and it's not for me to say, but the whole aquarium car park available for freedom camping. You could operate it like Perfume Point, for example, where you had some designated sites within that car park.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is it does give you room to lift your capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So, Max,
So if the law says that freedom camping infringements cannot be applied to people who are experiencing homelessness, if the site is for self-contained campers only, then, and somebody's homeless and they're living in their car on that site, does that mean they can't be infringed?
Under the Freedom Camping Act, yes, that's right.
They can still be trespassed though, can't they?
Under the Reserves Act, yes.
Yep.
Trespass for being homeless?
No, trespass for being in somewhere where they shouldn't be.
Oh,
They
so
don't
that's
meet
how
the
you get rid of them, is it? Trespass them?
Yeah, homelessness, it definitely makes it like a complex issue, but the Act and the changes to the Act have been really clear that infringement and compliance is not the route that national direction nor council is encouraging. We're going through the route of education first and support services, and our community services team is here as well, because there is plans in the think tank at the moment about how we address that issue. You're so right. It makes the matter really tricky to address both issues that look really similar and have similar effects, but are now outside of it, and not with the intention of, trespassing for the sake of trespassing, but actually meaningful change. But that is outside of the scope of this review. Tricky.
Richard.
Through the chair, just a couple of questions. You mentioned the dock site down Marine Parade-ish, or down Awatoto. How far down are you talking? Are you talking past what was the water plant?
Yeah, where the fishermen go and...
Yep, so that there's a couple of sites down there and both of them were cut out?
Yep.
Okay, and can't even read my own writing here. And you hadn't considered other areas, like I just looked at one before in West Shore, directly in front of the school. There's a car park down there. Was that considered?
Yeah, we had a look at those.
No,
Yep.
no good?
No good.
Or I
few
can't
in
read your
West
small
Shore.
writing.
Yeah, they didn't shine.
Okay, yep.
Yeah,
Numbers 13, 14 and 15.
13, 14, 15 and 16 are the West Shore ones.
Okay, yep, can't read, can't see.
That's okay.
Fair enough.
Hayley. Hi. Have we spoken to the aquarium about it yet?
Mm-hmm.
And their feedback was?
Positive.
Okay.
Yeah, really positive to have other uses in there if there's a limited number.
Yeah.
So there's still space for their visitors.
Cool. And another question, just about how we engage with Mana Whenua on this and what's appropriate in the process.
Yeah, good question.
Yeah, we contacted them and let them know that this review was taking place. We hadn't received any feedback. Let me clarify. We contacted our Te Waka Rangapu team. So at the time of pre-engagement, they didn't consider it necessary, but they will be part of our bigger consultation plan when we go out for the statement of proposal. Yeah. I think the key there, the key site there is Te Karaka, and that was a consideration that we did have. Perfume Point is a site of significance to Māori under the district plan and the proposed and the operative, so it is a consideration, but being mindful that it's an existing site, so those considerations have already been addressed previously through the last year. But a review is an opportunity to, again.
Shall we move into discussion about the options?
Can I just ask a question?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, go for it.
Yep.
Wizard Roz.
So I'm a caravaner, and I think there's been a preoccupation on the juicy vans and the motorhomes. In your criteria, did you look at the manoeuvrability of, say, a towed vehicle, a caravan, into the Freedom camping sites? And then obviously the parking implications.
Small ones are not.
Yes, yeah, we did, Nigel, because it's obviously critical. It has to function, right? And you can't have something sticking out into the access way through. I'm just whizzing through thinking about the criteria. Access for large vehicles. So it was our sixth attribute under number 2 that we've kind of said. And we did knock those little sites out based on the manoeuvrability. So absolutely.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yes, mindful of time. So the options that we are proposing are, we've kind of grouped them into 3 types. We're looking at 3 options. Our first option is about retaining what we currently have, not necessarily the status quo, but retaining the 3 sites that are already providing self-contained. So that would include the reopening of West Shore, potentially, that's how we've grouped it, and the conversion of Foreshore to a self-contained site. So that's option 1, that's closest to what we currently offer. The next one would be, based on the rankings that we've got, that Pump Track and Perfume Point would stay open because they're high performing.
Sorry, could we have that back on big?
Yeah.
Sorry, Nigel.
Hi, Nigel. So yes, so based on the ranking system from our site assessment, Pump Track and Perfume Point performed well. So we would only retain those and close the lower of the other 2 current sites that we have, which is the Foreshore and the West Shore site. And option 3 is to retain the pump track and perfume point, and add a new site, which is the aquarium, which was number 2. So really well performing. Obviously, we don't have any compliance data. We don't know about occupancy because it is a new site. But yeah, so we just want to walk through these options a little bit more and ask for your direction, because we are hoping to take this out to consultation with a draft bylaw later this year. So option number 1, trying to stay as close to status quo as possible. The benefits are that we would continue to meet the freedom camping demand that we've got. It's low cost from the point of view of not having to do any infrastructure or new instalment, and changing the foreshore to self-contained, we could actually see an improvement in behaviours at the site. It might make it more safe, it might make it more welcoming if that line is drawn between non-self-contained and self-contained, but we are aware that it is already a hub of unsafe behaviour, and it already unfortunately ticks a lot of those unsafe boxes according to that Section 11 of the Act. So this isn't, it's a balancing matter. Number 2, do you want to talk about this?
Sure. So the second option, as Jeriel mentioned, is retaining the pump track and perfume point, so the 2 highest scoring current sites, and closing the lower ranking current sites, which is foreshore and west shore. So overall, this would provide it for a better amenity at the sites that we do make available to freedom campers. Also reducing the environmental impact in terms of the number of sites that we have. And there's some potential savings in terms of maintenance and management by having fewer sites to look after. The unknown, however, is that we don't know what displacement activity will occur because of, in particular, the foreshore site closing. We don't know what might happen with campers or homeless, and where that activity may move to. Yeah.
And the final option...
Quick question on that last comment around displacement. I'm correct in thinking the homeless that you talk about may be displaced. They're not actually required to move as a result.
No, that's right. No, I mean, we don't know where campers who may normally go there might go. Yeah.
The displacement of homeless would be dependent on how we enact the closure. So
of the site.
Yeah, whether the site stays open during the day or only for, So that's where that would come from.
Just a further comment on that, would you look at moving that toilet out of there?
Yeah, we looked at generally improving amenities for all of the sites. We did look into the movement of that specific toilet block. At this time, we went off the assumption that there isn't enough funding to make such a significant change to any site like that. So if that was an upgrade, I mean, for any of these sites to be upgraded, we did consider that it would need to be part of a future budgeting exercise.
LTP.
Yeah.
Just a question of clarification. So if the foreshore was closed, would the toilet block be shut at night?
That is an option.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just a question there, we just put lights in there?
In the toilets?
In the toilet, in that car park?
I don't know. Amelia?
Have any what?
We're not sure. We'd have to find out.
There's something bright in there, 2 of them.
Richard?
Just through the chair. So if we were to convert that whole site to self-contained only, surely that would solve all of the problems in there.
Not necessarily.
Because there would be no space left for anyone else.
I mean, potentially, that is a potential outcome. The other side of it is that, if we don't do it without upgrading the site and making the site itself safer, then the behaviour might not change. I think it's fair to think both ways, that increasing the capacity and putting limitations on that non-self-contained behaviour. However, if the effect that we're looking at is caused by homeless activity, no change. If it's not, then it would still need the support of upgrading the infrastructure to see.
When you say no change, that would be up to Policing the Reserves Act Because if you're parked in a park you're not supposed to be in, there is a mechanism to sort that.
Yeah, but if you're home,
As opposed to if you removed all the camper vans from there, we could just end up with, it'll just be the homeless car park forever perhaps.
Yeah, that one will definitely come down to how we choose to manage the closure of that site. So if that is an option that you wanted to discuss, let me show you the third option as well. So that third option is the addition of the aquarium. This allows us, so where we might have been removing some capacity, this would allow us to replace or add. We think that this is a great site for all the reasons said. It allows us to be more flexible in our approach to addressing these issues. However, it is a new site, so there is some cost. It's not a new car park though, so the costs aren't as great as having to completely upgrade a poorly performing site, if that makes sense. So yeah, so these are our three options. There's some details there, but would love some direction or an indication of a preferred option.
Thank you, team, and for the collection of options. I suppose there's so many more options, right? You've had to pick some.
Yeah.
And so when I was listening to the assessment criteria, especially around, I guess, the top 5 that came out, I think it's really nice to be evidence-based when you make these kinds of decisions. So I just wonder why, say, an option around retaining the number of car parks across the top 5 sites couldn't be an option. So that would actually be the introduction of the Reef car park, the Hot Chick car park, and Perfume Point's existing, and the aquarium as your 3 new sites with, say, limited number of parks available at each. Could we consider that as an option?
Yeah, I think we could consider it as an option if you consider that amber line, the use and functionality, as appeal. Like you've got an appetite to manage that, because the issue that we made it amber, we can't take it out as it's not a knockout criteria because it's not to do with safety, but we did keep it in because it is to do with the function of the site itself. So meaning highly occupied already, really used during the day, smaller car parks as well, so manoeuvrability.
Sorry, when you, just for clarification, when you say amber line, are you talking about the ones that are redded out under the subtotal of safety?
No, the orange ones down the bottom.
Amber at the bottom.
Yeah, amber. Yellow, orange. Sorry. So they're sites where there would be difficulty in having a mixed use of function. They're very well used. They have multiple users. Some of them have parking restrictions, 2-hour parking, are used by commuters. They're very variable.
Final question, just to follow up on that. If it's around usability during the day, essentially the hours of use, we do have the ability in the bylaw to put timeframes, on when those, say, designated 2 or 3 or 4 parks, whatever it was, could be used for freedom camping?
We do. The factor to keep in mind, I guess, is the compliance and monitoring associated with that. You're adding another kind of layer. Yeah.
So with regards to this option 3, has there been any thought put into the number of sites at the aquarium, the number of parks at the aquarium?
Yeah, given the current occupancy levels of the foreshore and West Shore, we know obviously has been closed for nearly 3 years. We were anticipating between 4 and 6 at the aquarium.
So, but that probably wouldn't bring it up to the current level of...
Current at the foreshore is 8.
Oh, okay, so it wouldn't be much different.
And we know not all of those are used by freedom campers.
Okay. Sally, then Juliet, then Kate.
Thank you, all us down the line. Just flagging that I'm quite warm towards number 3 as an option, but I do have some questions. Is the bylaw process the only way for us to add sites?
Yes.
Thank you. How will we communicate, I suppose, our competing overlay of our approaches within the two acts that are in play when it comes to our whānau pounamu, our homeless community. So what I'm hearing from you guys is that the Freedom Camping Act kind of allows us to be more permissive around that. Internally, we've adopted an approach which is education-based first, connection to AWHI and to the support services, etc. How do we and then I suppose the infringement comes through the Reserves Act with a trespass. How do we communicate that to people, and how do we communicate that to our wider community as well through this?
Yeah, the comms piece is something we've been thinking about for a while, and I think the key in this part is communicating that while those effects are, all feedback is welcome, those matters would be considered irrelevant during our analysis because they're not effects that we can control. So the comms piece would be, or the planning so far has been around communicating that effects of homelessness activity is not addressed during this bylaw, but these are the things that we are doing, and being able to, with the support of our community team, this is how we are addressing the issue separately.
Thank you. I think that's the bit that I'm missing. I think you've done such a good job today of positioning us to understand that it is not part of this remit, and so, you've done a great job, but I'm just looking at what questions will come from the community. So if we can have that, make sure that piece is strong, I think that would be really helpful for us. My last question is actually around, I feel like whenever we do a piece of work like this, it's the unintended consequences that come back to, sort of haunt us a little bit later on, and just trying to mitigate those. In my mind, the options are, there's like one site over in Ahuriri, and then there's a couple of sites along the foreshore. Have we looked at, is there any evidence or research around proximity of freedom camping sites and what it means for potentially the negative behaviours that might occur? I'm just thinking of what's happened at foreshore. Like you said, foreshore is right there and pump track is right there, but yet they're such vastly different sites, and I understand it might be around infrastructure and the things that are here, but have we looked for that kind of research, and has that been considered in this process so far?
Do you want to comment? I think the framework that we use, while we didn't look for research specific to the effect of, freedom camping, we did look at the CIPTED principles, and that's what, in our assessment criteria, there is that proximity into, I think it's in the safety one. Yeah, it's about that activity mix, eyes on the street. It's about that passive surveillance, and our people who did the assessment, they did establish a certain distance. Do you remember that distance of how far we looked at? Proximity from a site to where a resident would be.
Oh, yeah, well, we did look at that until we muddled with
Reject.
our criteria. So we had a couple of sites where the closest resident was less than 20 metres, and then the bulk of the rest of them, the nearest residential properties was about 70 to 140 metres away, because they were across roads.
What about proximity to other freedom camping sites?
I don't know that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm just wondering if there's anything out there that says that, because the example that we have in front of us is that two sites very close together operate in very different ways.
Yeah,
So,
we haven't come across anything like that. It's a good question, Sally. We can have a look into it.
Okay, thanks. That's me.
Juliet. Oh, Juliet, keeping features. Freedom camping.
The speaker. Start again and get it all word for word.
Thank you. I drive through there every day, twice a day on a bike, and I can understand the look and feel of those two sites is completely different. So there will be a possibility that if you upgrade a little bit the amenity of the second site, you would attract the better the vehicles or the behaviors that you want to see. I think that is always go hand in hand. If you make it a little bit attractive, put a little bit of planting, improve the amenity of the area, you probably see that is well used and it's become safe and all of those things that you want to see. However, that site is, as we know, is mainly used by the homeless people, and the freedom camping bylaw, even if you close that site, is not going to resolve that issue. So just make sure that you have that in your mind when you make your option, the preferred option.
Juliet.
Oh yeah, so just support option 3 because it sounds sensible and well reasoned. And for the purposes of compliance and enforcement, I think we need something simple. So make the bylaw as simple as possible, and option 3 does provide that simple kind of guideline.
Keith.
We're sure.
Sure.
We closed that, 3 years ago, under health and safety. There's been no appeals about that closing. It's just the mixed message that we send to those people for 4 parks.
But it's not an option 3. Do you support option 3?
Oh, well, I'm just wiping the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, item 3. Yeah, I just trying to explain.
I know.
The hassle of it all.
Yeah.
Yeah, item 3.
And then Richard.
Really supportive of option 3. I'm assuming that that's going to inform a preferred position in the consultation on the bylaw. I would just like some certainty that when we go out to consult on the bylaw, if through the deliberations council did choose to include, say, at one of the other sites that are listed here, we would not have to go out and reconsult because our preferred option has included only what's included in option 3. So I'd just like the team, because we've been caught in that space before, to get some certainty, probably just at the council meeting when we come to adopt a preferred position, that there are flexibility to consider and include alternative sites as part of the consultation feedback.
Okay.
Thank you.
Richard.
Through the chair, a couple of questions here. Is there anything stopping me in a self-contained vehicle now parking in the Reef car park overnight? Is it deemed roading or is it deemed reserve?
Nothing stopping you for one night.
One night.
Yeah.
Yep, okay, cool. Thank you. Now, staying with the Reef Garden and Hot Chick, look, I've got no problems with that, providing we can manage some times to get people out of those spots. And I think in Taupo, on down by the yacht club, they actually say no camper vans parked here between the hours of whatever. So if we were prepared to manage that, then I'd have no problems with that, with doing that. May even make the area slightly safer. Don't know. Moving past this, currently you can seem to be able to park in all our reserves for a night or however long. And I'm thinking the likes of Onikawa Park over where I am, and we have all sorts of the wrong people, even in self-contained, causing grief in the car park, going to the toilet, wherever. Is there an opportunity with this part of the bylaw to exclude a few more sites if that was desirable?
Yeah, I would need to look into more about the site that you're speaking of, because when we talk about reserves, it's only the it's not grassed areas. It's only the car park. Yeah.
Yep.
So already that actually would be excluded if they're staying longer than one night. We can enforce on that as an issue.
Is that one night based off the park, the car park they're using, or the site? Because you can just head along the car parks, and I'm thinking off the Flanders Ave, but where the houses are relatively close, and there's all these people, parking there and having their activities.
Yeah, it is.
And again, it's next to where our families are walking to the gym or to the pools or something, and it'd be nice if we could just exclude from maybe some more of our residential areas.
Okay, yeah, we'll look into that one.
What do you want?
So,
Any further questions, comments?
I just want to say that we do have to take into consideration the homeless in our deliberations and options.
Well, no, we can't. We can't under this bylaw, mate.
I'm just saying, as governors, basically, if we're pushing them out of somewhere, the fact is they'll go somewhere else. That's what I mean.
But we're not under this bylaw. We're not pushing them out.
We're not.
Same number.
Yeah.
Not affected by the bylaw.
They're not affected by this bylaw.
And that's why I asked the question around the comms piece, so that people could understand the interaction between the two different pieces of legislation. So, yeah. Yeah.
So when we change the foreshore to, self-contained only, that might mean that the same people still go there even though they're not self-contained if they're homeless, basically.
Exactly.
Yep, that's it.
Under this bylaw, we can't prevent them from going there.
So why are we changing it?
This isn't seeking to address the effects of homelessness, though. The effects is that the site is unsafe because of the way that the site is. That's all that we can go off the basis of. If we start looking at the site is unsafe because of who comes there, that becomes a matter outside of the Act. So I think that's why we presented it as an option. So depending on the preferred option, we can present some more information about the legality and how that would work in operations. But it didn't sound like that was a preferred option.
Can I just,
anyway?
To help with the discussion around the people experiencing homeless, there is a workshop on the 31st of October. The Community Services team will be bringing a strategy and a proposal around how we're dealing with that at a sort of citywide level, and that might give you some comfort around that whilst these two things intersect as an activity, there is a strategy that the council will be adopting around that, and we're looking to bring that to you on the 31st of October.
Thank you.
Okay, so I've heard from a number of you, option 3 seems to be the preference. Anyone else got any other views? And just taking on board what Annette said about us having some advice as to if other areas that perhaps we get feedback on as part of the consultation.
Any of these?
Yeah. We have the ability to then decide to include those sites. Yeah.
We'll come back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
We've got one more slide. Very quickly, this is the time frame, next steps. So we propose bringing this to you at your meeting at the end of October for approval to go out and consulting in November, analysing over December, January, hearing and deliberations February next year.
Looks good.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to get on to gambling now.
Yeah. You have to go?
Yeah, sorry. Turn into a pumpkin hour.
Yeah.
No, I'm still at home.
Slow me down if I talk too fast.
I don't think
I'm in a motor.
I think no one's going to be slowing you down.
All right. Let's get into gambling.
So can you repeat
Okay, the purpose today is to receive your direction on a policy approach for the review that we're doing of the gambling venues policy. This is the policy that stipulates where gambling venues can be located within the city. So this, in case you're not aware, is basically Class 4 gambling venues are venues that host pokie machines, electronic gaming machines, and the policy also covers the location of TAB venues, so that's standalone TAB venues, not TABs within pubs. So very quick recap there. The policy problem is around the social harm that these pokie machines can cause. Councils are required to establish a policy to give effect to the Gambling Act and the Racing Industry Act. And we have a need to, we are required to balance the availability of gambling venues with harm minimisation and community benefit through grants. Okay, so current context is that we can specify whether any new venues can be established and where they can be located, and we can specify the number of TAB venues. We can also set restrictions on the number of gaming machines that can operate at a venue. We can also adopt a relocation policy, deciding if and when gambling venues can move within our area. And we can also adopt a club, this just applies to clubs, so a club merger policy, deciding if club venues can merge within the area as well. So at the moment, this policy, we're required to review it every 3 years. So this was last adopted in 2021. We have a sinking lid approach at the moment. Previously, we had a capped approach. So the sinking lid means no new consents granted for any additional venues or machines. It also sets a maximum number of venues for TABs, which currently is 2. There's caps on the number of machines within venues, and our current policy, it does allow for relocation of venues under certain circumstances, so only if they're upgrading or if the current venue's uninhabitable because they've had a fire, there's been a natural disaster, and it must be operated by the same licence holder and be located in certain zones of the district plan. So for this review, we're just needing to look at assessing if the policy is still the most effective way of managing venues and pokies given current trends, and looking at the activity trends, comparing our policy with other areas, and looking at some of the data from mainly the Department of Internal Affairs. So I'm just going to present some of that data now very briefly. This gives you a sort of snapshot over time, the last 9 years of the top line is the number of machines we have available in Napier, sitting at about 291, and the number of venues is 19. As you can see, it's pretty static. We adopted the sinking lid in April 21 when the last policy was adopted. Research from the Ministry of Health, Te Whatu Ora, points out that electronic gaming machines pose a high risk of harm because there's kind of high frequency of gambling in terms of how the machines are set up, in contrast to also risky but less frequently played casino games and prevalent but non-risky forms of gambling such as lotto. So they're quite a unique form of gambling. Nationally, there's been a slow downward trend in the number of venues and machines. We haven't seen anything like that here in Napier. The number of machines we have per 10,000 residents in Napier is 45 at the moment, per 10,000 people. Hastings has 30, and the national average is 28. So we're up there. The next slide shows a map of where our current venues are. There's a cluster in town, you can see there. A few over in West Quay and a few in Green Meadows, Taradale We've got a mix of club venues. There's about 4 of those, 4 venues run by clubs, and the rest are run by, apart from the TAB, which is the racing board, the rest are run by societies and trusts. This graph shows for the last year the location of pokie venues in terms of areas of deprivation in Napier. So 8 of these are in high, medium high, or very high areas of deprivation. So that's about a third on the right-hand side of that graph there. This next graph really does paint a picture of how much money is being put into pokies in Napier per year. So the bar on the right shows $22.4 million being put into pokie machines every year, well, last year in Napier. You see the downturn in 2020 when there was a lockdown for COVID and the impact of that, but generally an upward trend overall. So just on that, nationally, in the last 12 months, just over $1 billion was taken by pokies across all of New Zealand. And that was the first time that was reached was the year prior in 2022. So despite there being fewer machines and venues across the country, the profits from the machines has increased. And Department of Internal Affairs says that it's either more people are playing pokies or similar number of people are playing but they're betting more per game, or there's similar number of people playing but they're betting similar amounts but playing for longer. So there's a variety of factors that could be at play here. There's often comparisons made between this and online gambling and the growth in online gambling, but just to kind of resolve any myths around that. So $1 billion was put into pokies last year. The comparison is onshore New Zealand online gambling was about 300 million. So that's lotto and sports betting. And offshore online gambling was about 400 million. So online gambling combined about 700 million. So it's not in the same ballpark. And Cabinet did announce earlier this year that they're going to be introducing regulation of online gambling. So the next graph just gives us a few figures around the gaming machine profit, so the money put into pokies per head of population, so adults only, 18 and over for last year. The bars in the middle are the top 10 in New Zealand, so we rank at number 6. The bar on the right in orange is the national average, and the 3 bars on the far left are the rest of Hawke's Bay, so Central Hawke's Bay, Hastings and Wairoa. So you can see Napier's pretty high. That's based on 2018 census data, but it'll be a very similar picture for the current census. This shows you, for New Zealand as a whole, the gambling support, why people are receiving support for their gambling and what type of gambling that's for. And you can see the majority, almost half, is for people who are playing pokies. On lotto, TAB, casino, gambling is definitely smaller proportions there.
Good to know cards on.
And on average, the data that we have shows that about 200 clients from Napier receive gambling harm intervention support each year. So the next chart is around grants, because obviously money from pokie machines does get distributed in the form of grants. Just to note that clubs such as the RSAs and the Taradale Club are not required to distribute a minimum amount in grants, and they can distribute it, any profits that they make, in whatever way they wish to. And some of that goes to their own members and supporting their own members. But the other machine operators, the other trusts and societies are required to redistribute 40% of their profits in the form of community grants, and that's now reported. There's no requirement for them to distribute that back into the area from which the money came. So what we can see from the stats for last year, and this is probably consistent as with previous years, is about a 30% level of funding from gaming machine profit in Napier comes back to Napier, not the full 40%. And this graph shows you where that funding goes. So most of it to sports. Nationally, about 50% goes to sports. Okay, motoring along. Any questions about the data?
Just one quick.
Yeah.
Do environment and animals receive funding in other areas?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
It's less, it's showing up as 0 there, but it's about point something percent.
Thank you. I was just wondering.
Yeah. So 3 policy options. These are fairly straightforward and standard options for councils with these policies. One is to retain the status quo that we have, so that's a sinking lid, with relocations allowed under certain circumstances, and mergers also allowed, which I haven't put up there, sorry. The second option is we revert to the previous capped approach. And the third is that we look at having a sinking lid approach, which does not allow relocations or club mergers under any circumstances. So I'll go through each of those individually just quickly for you. So the status quo, we'd like to think, over time it would reduce the number of venues and machines in Napier. We haven't seen that happen to date since the last policy was introduced, but this policy has the potential to do that. It also has the potential, if there are relocations, to make sure they're only within certain areas and not in suburban areas, for example. There is some compliance costs for council for looking at applications for relocation where that is requested. So the second option of reverting to cap, there's some possible benefits to businesses. If a venue closes, another venue under a different licence holder could open. They could do that under this, so we'd be capped at 19 venues, which is what we have now, and 291 machines. So it means that if a premise closes, another person operating in another premise and under another licence could open. You would have minimal. More limited say, however, in where that might be and who that might be that would be opening. Yeah.
Question, so we couldn't reduce the cap below what it is now? That would be the sinking lid would do that?
No, that's correct. And then the third option, which some, I should have said the first option is in place for about 56% of councils in New Zealand. Not many have a capped. Most of the majority of the others have a capped, but there are 5 or 6 that have this option, which is sinking lid with no relocations and or no club mergers. So this would, if venues close, this would accelerate any reduction in harm in the community, because you're basically not allowing any relocations under any circumstances. It's a pretty straightforward policy to adopt and enforce because there's no exceptions, so there's no kind of grey areas, there could be in the long run potential reduction in community funding from gambling proceeds, but I think what we've seen already is that the profits from these machines are going up anyway, regardless of the decrease in the venues or machines. So possibly minimal impact on funding.
The relocation option, it had to be the existing licence holder?
Correct, at present.
So it can't be relocated to someone?
No.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
So you're talking option 3 or the one previous? The location?
Option 1, I think you were talking, the current.
I'm referring to
That's the status quo.
That
okay.
But if I'm saying which my preference is, it would be option 1.
Yeah, just the relocation, it opens up for a landlord to be pretty strong at someone, because if they put the rent up, if they leave, the site's gone, but they'd have to pay it.
Genuine reasons for an existing business to
move,
relocate, and I don't think they should be punished by having their...
Yeah, so 3 says no relocation.
Yeah.
Yes, I was just saying that.
And there's also, I think, an argument around the merging of clubs, particularly because clubs can actually utilise that funding themselves, and I've seen what the RSAs do, and they do use it for, for really good things. But with the challenges that our clubs are facing, I think we will see clubs starting to merge, and I don't think we should be penalising them for that either. So, yeah.
So one of the alternatives in option 3 is the with or without club mergers. You could just focus on no relocations with the sinking lid.
Yeah. Juliet.
No, yes, through the chair. Yeah, I think we need to get out of the top 10 for gambling in New Zealand, and I'd go for option 3, just make it harder.
Sally.
Oh, I so would have agreed before we started. But the evidence shows that here in Napier, that's not true, because we've already tried it and reduced it, and it just shows actually how we have these tools and they just don't work to the ability we want them to work. No matter how good our intention is around trying to reduce community harm. That the behaviour is so strong. Just seeing it go up over those 3 years since we've had the status quo in place and we made those changes, it's pretty demoralising actually. So I think that option 3, there's kind of this natural, for me as a governor, natural alignment to it. I don't want to do something that's ineffectual, and the evidence is showing me that it would be. So yeah, I'm kind of more geared towards the status quo.
Yeah, it's disappointing that the status quo, which we thought would reduce the number, hasn't done that. It would be interesting to know that cities or towns that did have option 3, if they did manage to reduce the number of machines, because that's what we had intended doing, and it's not what's happened.
Yeah, I guess at the end of the day.
The harm's just increased rather than decreased with the status quo.
At the end of the day, that option 3 is really just dependent on venues closing.
Yeah.
Or clubs merging. Yeah. You're just sort of waiting for that opportunity.
Yeah.
And it may or may not ever happen.
Which is pretty much
because they're getting money.
Well,
it is what we
essentially
do.
with status quo, but we are just providing that little bit of flexibility for businesses who have genuine reasons for needing to relocate. Why should they be penalised, as is with clubs that might decide to merge? That's why I prefer status quo option 1. Grego.
I appreciate this isn't a debate, but we're actually showing data that despite the fact that and I mean, at the end of the day, with something like this, you can pick out what you want, but we were showing data that despite the reduction in machines, the harm didn't stop and they were just going elsewhere. So I think we're just doing what we can.
No reduction of machines.
The harm didn't stop, the harm increased.
Elsewhere.
The harm increased.
Yes.
I think it is also, as demoralising it is as it is, council was only restricted to this one tool. So this is the only tool that we have, and all of the, so it's, so we're pretty limited on the impact that we can have actually on this. But that could go both ways. Is there more that we can do, or is what we're doing the best that we can do?
Has there been any changes to legislation since we did the last review? Because I thought there was.
There was intention to. I don't think that's actually come through yet with the change in government.
And the new government has sort of indicated that they may look at regulation for online gambling. Haven't heard anything else yet.
The other thing to keep in mind too is the review cycle is quite short.
Yeah,
so it is only 3 years.
Yeah.
And we know from the way that the bylaw cycle goes, that's not a lot of time to change that kind of behaviour. So that is another thing to think about.
Richard.
If we were to adjust our population figures and added in the likes of Whirinaki, Puketapu and the Esk Valley, would that skew our figures? Because I'm guessing they're not going all the way to Hastings to gamble. And I bet you Hastings is counting that part of the population in their stats.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. But
It may change them, but I'd say given the numbers of people involved, probably not by much. It's a rate Yeah.
I support
what we call
option one,
plain
status quo. I think we've got to be really careful about not taking on things that are not in our wheelhouse, and actually gambling harm as a societal issue is not in our wheelhouse. When we know, my recollection is it's education and it's addiction help that make the biggest impact on gambling harm. We've got this one little thing that we're doing our bit in. And we can care about the wider issue, and that's why we make the decisions that we do, but we've got to also be really careful that we don't take on the whole issue, because it's not something we have a whole lot of tools in our toolbox to fix. So that's why I support option one.
Okay. So I'm hearing option one from several. Any opposing views?
Yeah, I just don't feel sorry for the businesses at all. Like, I think we should do everything we can to reduce gambling.
We've got a majority supporting option one. Yep.
Cool. One last slide then on that. So just for your interest and information, and probably a bit of a decision, we spoke with Hastings Council the other week, who reviewed their policy, which is the same as ours. They reviewed their policy in August, but they didn't put it out to consultation after seeking legal advice because it was essentially a rollover, which is legitimately a process that you could follow. So it'd be good to get your thoughts on whether if you prefer status quo, do you have a preference for consulting on that or not?
I'm quite happy not to consult. It's only been 3 years. We're just rolling over. Yeah.
Not hearing a lot of noise from the
Not
community
hearing
about
it's not something the community's hot about at the moment.
Let's put resources into something else.
Yeah.
We did get inundated. We didn't get any of the little groups who benefited from this pokies money last time. We just got the industry, basically, who came from all over New Zealand, and the anti-gambling ones.
So is everyone happy if we treat it as a rollover and don't do public consultation?
Yep.
And as Annette said, that frees up resources. We've got a lot of stuff that we're consulting on. So, yeah.
Wonderful. So alternatively, we'll come to you with a paper
Yep.
and notify resolution.
Perfect.
Yeah, alrighty.
Great. That's us. You'll be pleased to know.
Done.
Thank you, ladies.
20 minutes.
End of the day.